Our third presenter is Yannis Stivachtis, who is a professor in political science, Jean Monnet Chair, and the director of the Center for European Union, Transatlantic, and Trans-European Space Studies. The book he's presenting today is a book that he recently co-edited with some of his colleagues. And again, he has slides, and the title of the book is right there on the first slide. So without further ado, I will turn it to you, Yannis, and can tell us about the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Francois. Thank you for inviting me to be here today to this event and giving me the opportunity to present the book that I co-edited with some very excellent colleagues. Before I start, I'd like to congratulate Jim and Rachel for their books. We all know how much time, energy, and commitment goes to publishing a book. I didn't write a book, but it also takes lots of time, energy, commitment to edit a handbook with 40 chapters, especially when you have to deal with academics and make sure that they meet the deadlines. So I have my own challenges, and I think at the end, as a chief editor, I managed to have a kind of comprehensive volume. Let me see whether, okay. I like to start a little bit with the history behind this volume. Things begin around 2013, 2014, when there are calls for a book series that could focus on critical European studies. And together with my colleague from the University of Newcastle, Hartmut Baer, decided to get this to Routledge and demonstrate that that would be an important endeavor project to undertake. And we said that there are difficulties, especially for junior scholars, for finding a publication outlet that would be interesting to publish critical approach to European integration. Routledge bought into our argument, so this critical European studies book series was established to help junior scholars publish critical work on European integration, create a venue where critical approach to European integration could find a home, and encourage the development of critical approaches to European integration. Later on, there was, or at least presented to me, the need to have a handbook, the purpose of which was to present the state of the art in the critical approaches to European studies, and also as a way to strengthen further the development of critical European studies. Last but not least, was a kind of effort or presented to me and my co-editors as such to create an intellectual community. The book came out late in December 2020, but it's dated 2021. And so far, we cannot speak a lot about achieving the objective because of COVID-19, but we hope that down the road, this might happen. In terms of book structure, we have an introduction that I have written, tried to put things together, and what the different editors and contributors are stood for. And then we have 4 parts, one concentrating on the critical theoretical approach to European integration that has been edited by Thomas Diaz. Then we have critical approach to European political economy, edited by Ben Rosamond. The third part focuses on European Union's internal security and has been edited by Didier Bigot. And at the end, we have the critical approach to European Union's external relations and foreign affairs that is edited by Evan Vangelis Fanoulis. Now, one of the most important things in the process was to tell the readers what we mean by critical. And here we have a dual meaning of this term. So the critical European studies handbook or even the book series altogether, seeks to question every single approach and policy that appear to be, or it is presented to be, as just, good, and appropriate. Whereas that we found them very often in various European Union documents. But what do we mean by just, good, or appropriate? Who defines what is just, good, or appropriate? And is just, good, or appropriate for whom? The second meaning is about, or is related to the handbook effort to question the static assumptions of traditional mainstream approach to European integration, such as factionalism, neo-factionalism, and intergovernmentalism. And here, three important questions were raised. What is to be studied? Which is an ontological question. What can we know? The epistemological question. And how are we going to know? Which is the methodological question. And there's an agreement among the editors and as an extension to the contributors, that theory serves a purpose. And answers to these questions we posed before are always political rather than neutral. And theory constitutes as well explains the questions it asks. A recognition that theory is always for someone and for some purpose. So in contrast to the traditional approach to European integration, which attempt to apply theories to political questions without questioning the broader power consequences, critical theories are distinctively political theories in that they understand the political nature of political inquiry. Critical theories seek to uncover preconceptions about historical reality and the contextual nature of knowledge, and questions assumptions about political systems and institutions, economistic rationalities, and methodologies. So all these, if you want, principles have been applied to chapters in these four different sections. But if we speak about critical approach to European integration, what do we expect the readers to find in those chapters? And there are 4 or 5, if you want, or let's say 4+1 approaches. You find historical materialism. And of course, contributors will focus on the work of Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, or the neo-Marxians or neo-Gramscian scholars. Then, of course, we have the Frankfurt School with Max Horkheimer, Theodor Adorno, and Jürgen Habermas. Post-structuralist approach associated with the work of Michel Foucault, Jacques Derrida, and the work of other scholars focusing on Friedrich Nietzsche's writings, and the feminist approaches. I spoke about 4+1 because we have included the English School of International Relations as an approach. But I refer to a particular group of scholars within the overall English School approach to international relations, and many of which have not only criticized the state-centric and Eurocentric approach to the English School, but have contributed a lot to a new type of work coming out of that school, and is to a great extent related to Europe. So that's why these 5 approaches are there. Now, there have been some questions that were discussed on the way to bring this handbook into existence. But these questions can go back to our original negotiations about even the title of the Critical European Studies book series. And what Hartmut Behr and myself were arguing back then is that probably the title of the book series should be Critical E-European Studies instead of Critical European Studies, in the sense that wanted to demonstrate that there was a a distinction between European Union and Europe. And usually, when we speak about European studies, people think Europe as European Union. And therefore, it's important to distinguish between European Union studies and European studies. There was lots of negotiations back and forth, but we're pressed to accept the title European for market purposes. So now, as you may see, the market logic superimposes on this critical question that Hardenberg and I myself posed. But at least we agreed that the description of the book series, we have to make sure that these are two different things we're talking about. But as you may see later on in this handbook, again for market purposes, there's a conflation between Europe and European Union, something that I was not very happy, but again, that's what happened. Also, there is Europe even is not only between the Atlantic and the Urals, but because of institutional developments, we may have places in the European periphery which through institutional developments to some extent are related to Europe. And that's, we have the new, or the development of a new concept of trans-Europe. Okay. Now, the other thing I wanted to bring, and I think that was one of the contributions of the English School of International Relations here, is that what happens with the European Union, or what we observe in the relation between the European Union and the countries, at least on its periphery, can be observed historically when we study the relations of the Westphalian European system that expands outwards, and we speak about the European colonialism. So we see now as English School, European Union as a regional international society that tries also to, through enlargement and through regulations of the relations with the countries on the periphery, to expand, to create an order in its periphery and beyond. So we have a kind of comparison between the historical expansion of Europe and the contemporary EU enlargement and the globalization of European order. And this is important to understand something later on, which is related to the sui generis argument. There is an agreement that at this moment, the European Union is neither a state nor an international organization. But in the absence of a federal theory that goes beyond the state, European thought, political thought, and when I say political, I don't necessarily refer to scholarly thought, but the thought of politicians. We invented a term called supranationalism. And then everybody proudly announces that the European Union is something that we call sui generis. Consequently, the argument has been that the EU is unique. It represents a highly sophisticated political unit. Therefore, its establishment and evolution cannot be properly understood and analyzed as we did with the states or international organizations. And since the European Union is something new, errors might be made on the process of European integration. But criticism of the EU's actions should be constructive, which means that, we can understand why it happens and we should excuse certain things. However, research on the nature of various unions of states reveals that this view of the European Union is incorrect and misleading, and that the EU can be studied and understood also in Madisonian or Tocquevillian terms. Also, history can easily inform EU actions and EU institutions, and how they should take into account history and what lessons we can learn from history related to the historical expansion of Europe, and be very critical to things we do and resemble a lot to what was done before. It seems that there is a kind of ignorance or purposeful ignorance in Brussels, and therefore policies are enacted that we see problems. And going back, since Rachel mentioned Egypt and the Mediterranean region came to mind, one of the most problematic, if you want, areas of EU foreign and policy, and which also relate to the interior security, is about the European neighborhood policy, how the EU relates to its neighborhood. And the 2004 policy could not work. The Europeans wanted to tell all those countries on its periphery what the problems were in those countries and what the solutions to these problems will be. Supposedly, the policy was to be a kind of partnership, but what instead became a kind of teacher-pupil relationship, that the Europeans knew very well what the problem was and what the solutions were. But this never worked. 4 years after, the review led to certain revisions. 2011, after the Arab uprising, became obvious that all these ideas of the European Union and how we deal with North Africa and Middle East were not working. New revisions were made, and still the same attitudes, European attitudes, continue. Until 2015, we have the final revision at this moment with ENP, and we see how it goes. But this is only an example. The same thing happens with the Eastern Partnership, or the European Union's relations with countries of the Caribbean, Pacific, and Africa. So it seems that we do not learn, or we do not know, and therefore commit the same mistakes again. And whether it will be in the economy sector, where it will be in the security sector, or whether it will be in the foreign sector, the same issues apply. And that's what my colleagues, as my co-editors and the contributors, try to address in these separate sections. And I like to stop here. I don't know if I have already got my time, and I will be happy to answer any questions you may have, if I'm able to answer your questions. Thank you.